Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. And if you are joining for the first time, this is part of our e-commerce series for which we meet every Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. We pick one topic related to e-commerce, and we always have a very exciting panel that is willing to share their insights and wisdom. For today, we very exciting topic, and that is going to be super exciting for designers and developers. But we need to understand how to work with designers and developers if we want to be successful with our e-commerce initiative. So we are going to take deep dive into the process of wireframing, why that is going to be important for the e-commerce initiatives. Before we do that, we are going to start with everybody's intro. I am going to start with my intro. And if you guys don't know me, I'm Sam Gupta. I am principal at Elevate IQ. I have roughly 20 years experience leading ERP, e-commerce, digital transformation engagements. So tons and tons of experience around wireframing process. It's actually a fun part, to be honest. I mean, in my experience, as part of Elevate IQ, we are an independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm. Our services include business process re-engineering, ERP and e-commerce platform selection. We do a lot of contract negotiation as well as ERP project recovery. On that note, I am going to move to Eric for his intro.
Good evening, Sam and everybody else. My name is Eric Landmann. I'm the e-commerce division manager of Earthling Interactive. Earthling is an agency that builds and maintains e-commerce sites and web apps for quite a variety of different companies. We're not a vertical integrator, but we build and maintain them. And this topic I have a lot of experience with, so looking forward to talking about it. It's pretty cool.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Eric. Chris, can I move to you next for your intro?
Absolutely. Hi, Sam. Wonderful to be here with everybody. I am Chris Harrington, the president of Gen Alpha Technologies. We are a SaaS software provider of digital commerce for original equipment manufacturers, aftermarket organizations, dealers, distributors. That's kind of the lane that we're in. So certainly we have had a lot of wireframes in our history as we have developed our solution for our customers. And this should be a really fun topic today. Thank you, Sam.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Chris. Paul, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Sure. I'm Paul Wildarchik. I'm pinch hitting today for Ken Novak. We're from Hatch Quantified. We consult and provide managed services for B2B manufacturers, OEMs, and distributors to help them grow their e-commerce operations. In particular, we work with organizations that have struggled to get outside of 1-2% of sales online.
Okay, I'm so excited to see the pinch hitting today. Thank you so much for being here, Paul. Okay, Dave, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Absolutely. Dave Meyer, president and founder of BusyWeb, based out of Minneapolis. We are a growth marketing agency that specializes in web design and launching optimized stream flows and workflows for our audience that help you identify and then close deals. So wireframing is a huge part of what we do because everybody needs to be on the same page as we're designing landing pages and conversion pages. Thanks, Sam.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Dave. So before I start with the first question, if you are in the audience and joining for the first time, make sure you guys are going to be sending your questions and comments because we are going to be reviewing them. We are going to be responding to them during the show. If we cannot get to them during the show, our panelists are going to get back to you with the answers. On that note, I am going to start with Eric with the first question, and that is going to be just starting on the journey of wireframes. For a lot of executives, when they think about wireframes, they are thinking, I don't know why I'm doing this. Okay, so let's say if we were to describe why are we doing wireframes and why they are important for any of the digital commerce or the e-commerce journey. Eric, do you want to take that?
Sure. More than once I've heard, oh, that looks like a big expense. Why do we have to do that? And well, the reason is developers and designers need to come up with something that will help you build your site. And if you say, well, we can just take that and modify it a little bit, and that's just a path to ruin. I guarantee you that's not going to work. So the wireframing process allows customers and designers and developers, it's not just for customers by any means, to visualize what the site will look like, what the interactivity will be, what pieces of content are where on the page, and how the user flows from page to page and through the system. So it is really essential, because without a tool like this, a lot of ideas are in people's heads, and usually there's some disconnect between different views of how something should happen. Developers think one way, marketing people think a different way. The customer says, oh, I saw this other cool site over there, so they just think it's going to work like that. So this is a way to bring everybody into the same workflow and process. And it also allows them to not just look at something, but with certain other add-on tools, they can provide feedback on the wireframes, like right there. So it's a very direct way to convey the ideas and the workflow of a site, and collect feedback, and then use that as a working tool to build out the site. It also acts as a record. So if somebody says, well, I never saw that, it's like, well, no, actually you did. Here's here's that version right there that we talked about this, and here's our comments and why we did this and why we couldn't do that. So it's really essential. It helps control the production of the site.
Okay, could not agree more. I think you touch on some very important points there, and obviously the visualization is going to be super important, and the feedback is something that you mentioned. Feedback is very important as well. But the most important part that you mentioned is the accountability. I guess that is super important, especially if you are committing for the budget, and if you are trying to create something that they didn't want to begin with because they thought it was something else in their head. So obviously that's going to be a problem for the overall investment. But obviously you are using a lot of keywords there. I don't know if executives are going to be familiar with that. So let's say if you talk about the interactivity, right? So do you want to expand a little bit more on that? So from the designer or developer perspective, we sort of know what navigation is, but I don't know if executives really understand why that needs to be communicated, why that matters in the process of wireframing. Do you want to touch a little bit on that?
Sure. These tools allow you to essentially create a wireframe or pieces of a page, and you can actually put hotspots on the designs or on the wireframes themselves. When you roll over them, it'll light up, and so the user can tell, oh, that's a hotspot that you can click on that and it'll go somewhere. So that's how the interactivity is added. Now, you're not the designer or the person building the wireframe isn't going to link absolutely everything, but if they have a top nav, they might click it. They might make one of the categories active, and then you click on that, and then it jumps over to a category page, so they can see and interact with the wireframe, even though it's not a live site. It's really just a mock-up. Did I answer your question? I get lost. I got a lot of thoughts going on here.
Yeah, you definitely did. Thank you so much, Eric, for that. And obviously other people are going to build on that. They are probably going to have these stories as well. So Paul, I'm actually going to come to you. So let's say if you are trying to describe the journey of wireframing, why that is essential. So you can either pick a story or simply build on what Eric has already mentioned, why wireframing are really important for any of the e-commerce initiatives.
So a lot of the time that I work on e-commerce sites, it's been around findability of product, and spent a lot of time on terminology. And what we found is, and this is tangential to wireframing, but you can test terminology in a lot of ways to find out if it's the right terms people use to look for a product when they're searching through the hierarchy through a catalog. But I found that wireframing and actually doing the testing of the wireframes with the terminology that we're going to use in the wireframe environment is a great way to help find if people are having problems with not only the structure of the site and the usability of the site, but also with the terminology that you use. So very often we'll work with wireframing tools to not only test the wireframes and the site design, but also to test the hierarchy and how the products are organized so that we make it easier for people to find them. And we've had major changes in design from doing this early sort of testing, actually during working with customer groups before doing the site build out or the site, early in the site design as part of the customer research. We'll use wireframing tools to find out how customers want to see products organized. And an example I can give is I worked with CommScope. They're a telecommunications company outside of Minneapolis, and they had just gone through a merger where they were bringing together three very, very different product companies that each had their own site and each had their own users.
Yeah.
And we needed to test how would users see their products inside of the one CommScope now that was there, right? So we had to go and test different ways of organizing those divisions, those products. Should they be organized by division or by product type? Should they be organized by industry segment? And we had wireframe tools that we built all those options out in and tested as part of the customer research. And it got us on the right foot very, very early on with vetted voice of the customer.
Very interesting story. I have never thought that, any of the integration or the merger scenarios are actually going to be the merging of the customer experience as well. So this is very, very, very interesting, where you have three different customer personas, and then you are trying to merge the customer journeys and the website. So obviously that is very interesting. And one of the things that you mentioned is the testing. And I don't know if people are going to be familiar with, okay, what is testing in the context of wireframing? Testing could mean a lot of different things. Okay, for our manufacturers, they are thinking, okay, product testing, manufacturing product testing. For my developers, they are thinking some other testing. Okay, so what kind of testing are we talking about? What is the scope of that?
So when you're doing testing, you're looking at the navigation flow that people take. You're really literally looking at the path that they take from where you start their journey, which isn't always on the homepage, right? Because if you think of how we navigate to a site, we might do a Google search and then land on the product detail page as part of a product catalog, right? So now, let's say I ended up on the wrong product catalog page, and I want to find the right product from where I am. So I've searched for something, I'm landing on the wrong page. So we'll say, you've landed on this page, you're looking for this thing, you didn't find it, what do you do next? And then we'll trace their path as they click through the wireframes to see what branches they go down. So as Eric mentioned earlier, you don't build out every single possible click, because you're really looking at fairly static screens that are wired together with hotspots so that you can walk through them, right? Like a user would navigate. We're not building a real application, we're building a slideshow. So, but in the test environment with some of these wireframing tools, you can administer the same test to a number of users and follow their pathways through the tools, and then compare and chart them out. And what you end up with is a node chart that shows they started here, and then they wandered down there, and a thicker branch will show where more people went, and a thinner branch will show where fewer people went. So you can actually visualize how the crowd that you tested this on flows through the sample application. And it's really enlightening, because you can see most people get it right, but people still make this mistake. And then you can ask yourself, was this a design mistake, or was this a terminology mistake in terms of what we call that product category or product, or how we labeled a menu, or how we labeled a call to action button on the screen?
Very, very interesting. Thank you so much, Paul, for that. So, Chris, I'm actually going to come to you next. It's going to be either you can pick a story or you can simply describe what it means to think about wireframe when we are thinking about these e-commerce initiatives.
Yeah, I think the easiest way for me to frame it up is something that I've learned a long time ago, is that 65% of the population are visual learners. So if you think about, we as individuals like to see it, and that's the way we collaborate. That's really what you're doing in a wireframe exercise, is that you're taking concepts. Sometimes it can be a scope that somebody has defined. We would like to do this, and it needs to do this, this, and this, and all you have are words, but you have no visual representation of what those words might mean. Wireframing can be as simple as what people do on the back of a napkin, right? So you're sitting around at the bar with your friends and you want to design something, and you pull out a pen and you're on the napkin and you're drawing things, right? So there are design tools that allow you to elaborate that. And then through the collaboration with different team members, as Eric and Paul have mentioned here, you're collaborating with your designers, your developers, potentially the customer, and you're really starting to build the framework of what is going to be the solution, but you're bringing those elements in so that people can see the structure. You might not have all of your spacing correct yet because you get into some more final elements as you continue to iterate and build. But the nice thing about a wireframe is, as you're doing this, you can do it fast and inexpensively. So it can be where you are thinking about ideas. So you're doing that brainstorming of what could be possible. And through your designs, these wireframes, you can start to ask yourself, what if? What if the user wants to go here? What would that look like? So what is the next workflow that you have to consider? What if they click here, they click here, they click here? Are you stuck, right? So how do they get back? So we get to ask those what ifs and kind of work through in a very inexpensive, fast kind of way to start developing something that can be that first iterative process to say, is this worth continuing? Do we want to make the investment? Should we take the next step? So I like to think of the wireframes as we have an idea or we have a scope, and now people need to see it and then determine whether they are going to approve it to take that next process, which is typically going to require maybe a higher fidelity to jump into some of your other language that you know we're probably going to get to, is that there are then better iterative tools that you can start to bring in the aesthetics of your site. You know, what will the coloring look like? What are the spatial elements? How does it fit into a page? Usually in that early wireframing, you don't have all of that established yet. So that's how I would think about wireframing, as a foundation, and then you just iteratively build from there.
Yeah, could not agree more, and love the way you describe the hypothesis and the path you can really trace using the wireframe. So that is super important. One thing that I am going to highlight here, especially from my experience, irrespective of whether you are talking about code or a product or wireframe, okay, you can always do, too much wireframe, a little wireframe. So you can over engineer anything, right? I love the example that you mentioned about just doing it on a napkin. It cannot be easier than that. The whole idea of wireframe is really to reduce the amount of effort and somehow communicate with people. So do you have any sort of best practices, Chris, that you might be able to highlight in terms of when you are probably doing too much wireframe, when you could have literally written down a piece of text? It's not as complex. You don't have to design. People have forgotten to write the text, to be honest, at times. That's what I feel, just because you have these workflow tools available, which is great. But yeah, sometimes it could be too much wireframe. Have you had similar experiences or not?
Well, I think it's the best way to describe a best practice. I think, again, we're framing this up in the sense of e-commerce, and e-commerce has some best practices, or I would even say some UX laws and design principles that are going to apply. So you have to assume that if you're building a page on an existing e-commerce platform, that many of the design elements are going to be there, and they're going to be in spots that you would anticipate. So don't try to reinvent something that already has an established expectation, because we as humans have habits, and you have to follow our habits and not make people lost. So in the wireframe process, you wouldn't want to reinvent the entire design, if that makes sense. So that would be one thing. But I would stress keeping it simple. What problem are we trying to solve, right? So if you can get to the problem that you're trying to solve and think about the simplest elements to solve that problem, that's what you want to draw and map. And your goal is not to get every interaction correct necessarily at the wireframe phase. This is our purpose. This is the problem we're solving, and these are the workflow that we're thinking. And then you stop there. Does everybody agree? Have we hit the elements? Before you go much further. That's what I would say,
Okay.
Sam.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. So, Dave, I am actually going to come to you and you can either pick a story or you can simply talk about how to start on a journey of wireframing. I don't know if you're going to have anything to add on top of what everybody has said.
Yeah, I actually have a few layers that I want to put down here, and to back it up again for our intended audience, for business owners, manufacturing that are really trying to make the decision, how do I do my website, my online asset as fast as possible? That's what wireframes are a tool for. It's really a blueprint for a website that's matched with a map to a conversion. So you don't build a house without having a blueprint, and you don't go anywhere without having a map, or in today's parlance, you have a Google map, right, to get you where you want to go. So that's what this rapid prototyping does, is it gets you there faster, it gets you there cheaper, and it helps you to identify what common elements you need to have on your site. There's 3 big elements that every interface needs to have inside of a wireframe. There's nav elements, navigation elements, there's content elements, and there's conversion elements. So you need to outline all of those and have them available. You can almost think of these as, roads and terrain and other things on your map, right? So as you build that out, there's one more key layer of complexity that good wireframes need to be able to allow for. And that is mobile versus standard width display. Every single thing that you develop in wireframe, you need to develop in wide aspect ratio and built for a little 4-inch screen. That's called mobile responsiveness. And so every wireframe has to have both options on that. You need to be able to see what a purchase process is for an e-commerce site in manufacturing, so that people can buy your widget on a computer and on a phone. And so as you build that out, it's important to have a good tool to help you wireframe that, such that it's easy to manage and navigate, and that it builds those common elements kind of on the fly together. And there are a lot of good tools out there that can help you do that. Actually, most good CMSs or content management systems are built such that you can kind of rapidly prototype a wireframe out. Like there's the granddaddy of all wireframes, the napkin, right? And then there's putting it together on a sheet or a page, and then there's getting it into an interactive format. And you have to do all of that as you build your design for whatever elements you're trying to build. But as you get deeper and as you build forward, these are all tools to help you reach agreement as quickly as possible, to help you catch anywhere where you're losing your audience or where things might not work. And of course, from us as developers and designers, it's our shorthand to make sure that our client is signing off on this, because I think it was Eric that mentioned this. I want somebody to sign on the dotted line to say, I agree that this is what this is going to do, because it gets expensive when it gets committed to code. You want to do it when it's cheap and where you can map it out and say, okay, well, that needs to go over here, that needs to go over there. So make sure that you're also taking care of your mobile responsiveness as well. And I think that kind of rounds out everything that I wanted to add on right now. But a fantastic conversation. This is fun.
Okay, love it. So love the layers, love the comment about blueprint and the map, and love the description that you mentioned about the different elements that you have. The question that I am going to have for you, and obviously my understanding is going to be that you are probably going to be most familiar with HubSpot, because that is your favorite tool. I don't know if you are going to have, any insight into the other tools. But when you look at the mobile experience, in my mind, that is sort of the technical boilerplate, especially when we are talking about building the e-commerce experience. If we are talking about building on top of the existing platforms, and the reason why we want to build on top of existing platforms, that they would have figured out all of these technical elements so that I can focus on my business requirements. So when you are, let's say, doing the development, do you still have to worry about the mobile experience, or is that all taken care by the CMS or the platform that you might be using, Dave? That's a follow-up question for you.
And that was to me, Sam?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Sorry. Yeah.
It needs to be sketched out both places. So I don't commit wireframing for obvious reasons. You need to pay attention in wireframes to UX, user experience, as well as UI, user interface. So how are people going to interact to that? And it's your job as a developer, it's our job as developers to make sure that that scans and pans across both sets of information, right? So, and actually there's a third one that I didn't even mention because it's not really used that much, but there's the massive big screen. So YouTube channels, for example, they have the 4K design and layout, then they have the PC layout, then they have the mobile layout, right? So you need to build out for any, it's mostly just viewports, or how wide the screen is or what the resolution is of that screen. But there's different rules that apply to different structures. So you can't just rely on the CMS to do that. There's different taps on a computer. You're probably going to have navigation elements visible and maybe even hoverable as you look at the nav, where you hover over it and then other things fly out. On a mobile device, that's not possible. So you normally have what many of us in the design world call hamburgers, right? Where it's just a little 3-line thing that you tap it and it pops down and it goes, and it's dependent on the tap. And so you have to build that and represent that inside of your wireframe so that people get it. Phone numbers need to be much more tappable with your thumb. They need to be highlighted better. Calls to action need to have specific attention paid to them. We're not even talking about accessibility yet. You need to have enough contrast, and you need to have enough space around it so that if someone's tapping on something, they're not tapping on something they don't intend. There's all kinds of stuff that goes into this, and which is why you want to have someone that knows what they're doing helping you through the wireframing process.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Dave, for that. So, Eric, I'm actually going to come to you. Obviously, you are going to have some follow-up comments there overall in terms of when we are looking at this cross-compatibility across the devices. But, obviously, my question to you is going to be related to the low fidelity versus high fidelity. You want to sort of keep the iterative process when you are building these wireframes, because as Dave pointed out that in the beginning, if you keep sort of the low baggage, then it's always going to be cheaper. But as you advance in your process, it's going to be more expensive. And that's why you sort of want to take the iterative approach as you are bringing in more flavors to your wireframe, as you are making it sort of richer. And I also want you to touch on the other aspect that is going to be cross device compatibility. So if I look at from the business owner perspective, I'm getting these big bills from Shopify, BigCommerce, any e-commerce platform, Gen Alpha, and my expectation is going to be they are going to worry about the technical part. They would have figured out the mobile experience. And so my question to you is going to be, as an executive, do I still need to worry about the cross compatibility, or can I simply rely on the platforms?
The latter is definitely not true. The templates that are typically used as base templates don't always take into account all of the different viewport and all of the things that you want to see. The viewport is the width and aspect ratio of the device, for those not familiar with that term. So designers generally start with a viewport, with a base template, and then we drop in elements that we want, or we remove elements that aren't to be seen. So when we start, we usually start with a desktop template, because a lot of our sites are business or consumer, and they're going to be on a desktop or a tablet, and we may wireframe those. But then when we get to the mobile experience, we actually might switch to a more high fidelity or high res design tool, something like InVision or Sketch or Figma, where we actually drop in the graphics. And the reason for that is most users just can't visualize what this tiny little square is up in a corner of a screen. They want to see the hamburger menu. They want to see how big their logo is. You can't just draw a little box with their logo, because if their logo's the wrong shape, it's going to look horrible, but you can't really represent that in a small mobile wireframe. So we will switch at that point to using these high-res, really kind of combination wireframe, but also design tools. That same design collaboration tool like Figma or Sketch or InVision, one of those, it also informs the designer they can pull style, or sorry, it informs the developer. They can pull style sheet information right off of that. So it's kind of a multi-purpose tool. It's not just to display it, but it actually helps speed up the design process. So relative to your question about whether this is important, yeah, for sure, because the developer can pull this actual styling right off of the design tool directly. We've had situations where, here's an example. We designed a very large input form for a customer that hauls food grade commodities. The thing is massive. It's like 3 feet tall. And I was showing this to the customer and saying, this is really huge. Are you sure your administrators can use this? They're saying, oh yeah, we've got to see all that information. We've got to see the commodity and the load and the pickup date and the pickup window and the delivery date and the bill to and the ship to. It's like, oh, there's more. All of the steps. And so we're going, okay. So we build it and they still didn't visualize it. They said they started using it going, wow, we've got to scroll all over the place. Well, yeah. So we had to do another wireframe with clickable accordions to open and close various panels. So even though we were in development, still we still had to extend the design wireframing concept another step, because to Chris's point, people just can't always visualize these things. So I covered a lot of stuff there. But I think the most important thing there is when we start dealing with mobile devices, especially phones and tablets, we do need to switch to a more visual tool with actual graphics, product pictures, navigation, mockups, literally things you can click on and see what happens when the accordion expands. It's not quite development, but it's getting close to it.
Okay, so very interesting commentary there. And I am going to have one follow-up question for you. So let's say if I am thinking more from the executive's perspective, they sort of understand that mobile is probably going to be different experience, but I'm not sure if they really understand why the mobile needs to be visual and the website is probably going to be okay on a napkin. That seems like a stepchild, to be honest. So do you want to describe a little bit more?
Sure.
Why the mobile is,
people get into trouble with things like search boxes, quick search boxes. What do you do with a quick search box on a tiny little phone? It's not the same experience at all. So on a typical desktop website, we have integrations with search engines like Elasticsearch, which returns a ton of data. It'll have a product name, a price, sometimes a product picture, might have a couple categories. It might be multi-tabbed, so that if there's documentation, it returns a separate tab with the documentation. Well, what do you do with that on this phone, which has a screen of 2.5 inches wide? That's like, there's no way you can accommodate that. So you've got to mock it up. Otherwise, it'll be a completely unusable feature. The other thing we get into trouble with is navigation. Always there's problems with navigation because people have categories that are, 35, 40 characters wide. Well, what do you do with that on a tiny little screen? You either wrap it around or you make it clickable or something. You abbreviate it. Usually that's not a good solution. But you've got to do something with it. And customers they can't visualize it. So this is a way to say, here's what's going to happen. Is this okay? Probably not. So then you have an opportunity to talk about how to solve this particular problem.
Okay, very interesting commentary. So I am actually going to move to Paul. And Paul, obviously Eric mentioned a lot about the markups. You mentioned a lot of, about the markups. And I don't know if the people who are listening are really going to be sure about what a markup is as far as the wireframe goes. So do you want to build on top of that, what a markup really is, and then talk about, the importance of low fidelity, high fidelity wireframes?
Yeah, so the term we use is mock-up. As a mock-up is an approximation of a design, right? So when we're talking low fidelity wireframes, a designer or a user experience person will commonly use the term mock-up to talk about those, or sometimes we just call them mocks, right? So that's just some jargon you might hear when you're working around people that use wireframes. Low fidelity, there's actually a tool that's called Chalkmark because it's the design looks like chalk on a blackboard, right? And so really think low fidelity is like the fidelity you have on a bar napkin or a placemat or a whiteboard or a piece of scrap paper. It's boxes and arrows and rough regions. And usually you're using that at that point to rough out how you want the content to be organized in the particular experience, whether it's a mobile experience or whether it's a laptop or desktop or tablet experience. And so getting that sort of where do we want the content? What's the proportionality of different pieces of content to each other? If I'm designing a product page on a catalog for e-commerce, what's the most important information that I want to represent? And if I need to knock out some information for the mobile experience that's less important to my mobile users, then I'll first use a mock-up to validate that concept, a low fidelity wireframe to validate that with customers as part of my customer search. As you're moving further down the design process, it's really important to get to what we would call a high fidelity wireframe, which you probably couldn't tell without looking at it really closely. The highest fidelity would be it looks just like the application. And at that point, we're talking about something that's pretty well thought out. The fonts are thought out. Any of the spatial elements are thought out. The navigation is thought out, as well as the terminology that you're using. And I really want to bring up the fact that shout out to Eric for bringing up that when you move from, a wide format presentation user experience to a narrow format for mobile, your choices of terminology will probably change. And having worked as a taxonomist, which is a $20 word for somebody who spends a lot of time thinking about the words you choose for your products and your navigation, right, in your product categories, we actually spend time testing those terms, right, to understand what terms people use when they're searching for things. We use search logs and so on. So we'll identify alternative short terms that people will recognize in a smaller format. And then we'll represent those terms in a high fidelity rendition of the mobile experience to make sure that people can find what they're looking for. And we'll actually go so far as to take those and put them into navigation testing tools. So a navigation testing tool, like I was describing before, well, you start somebody off in a particular place in the interface, and you give them a problem to solve, like find this, and then they have to click on things. And we're not just testing the design at that point, we're testing the words that we chose, especially the shorter terms that we chose to display on the mobile interface.
Okay, very interesting. So I'm going to just reiterate what I heard. And, obviously, I was thinking that there is another term called markup. I think people are going to be familiar with mock-up. You are trying to mock something up. And, I think Dave used the term blueprint, and I was not sure if markup is also a term that is typically used in the quality settings in the manufacturing, where they are literally trying to mark the points, the hard spots up. I don't know if that is typically used in the wireframing process as well. Is markup also a term, or just are we talking about just markup?
Not to my knowledge. I haven't come across that term in my experience, but that's not to say other people don't use that term. Is it possible that it's used for providing comments on the design? Because that's another case where annotating or marking up comments on the design when you're putting it out for feedback is a very important part of the process. And so yeah, in terms of, that's a feature set that's entirely different from the testing that I was talking about. But that's where you're putting a design out there, you're letting people navigate it, and you're letting them add comments, right, or even draw on it, right? So think about the experience of, I draw something on a whiteboard, Sam, you come up and draw something else on the whiteboard, Chris will come up and add her commentary and so on. And some of these tools have collaborative environments that let people work together to create a design. So it's not just one person sitting down and drawing the design, it could be a team working to collaborate as well.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Paul, for that. So, Chris, I'm actually going to come to you, and I know that you had a lot to say when you were thinking about the high versus low in the last segment. So I'm pretty sure you probably are going to build on that. So let's talk about low versus high wireframes and why they are important. How low do you want to go in low wireframe? How high you want to go in the high fidelity wireframe?
Yeah, and I think in my last segment, I got to talk about the low. Yeah, and you asked me some of the best practices for low. So I would say that really the next iteration is that higher fidelity. That means that the team is now invested in moving forward with what has been designed in the low fidelity wireframe, and you say, yes, let's keep going. Let's add let's add logos. Let's add, the skin, the colors that would match the logos or whatever branding guidelines you might have. Let's start bringing in the other elements that Eric and Paul talked about with respect to whatever it is that you might be designing. The way I like to think about high fidelity is it's almost what your solution is going to look like, but it's not connected to the back end. So in our complete, when we release to production, we're fully integrated. The user interface and the back end are talking to each other. That high fidelity is taking you through the click path of the problem that you're trying to solve. So it might not be your entire feature set of everything in your product. It's what is being enhanced or what is the new custom development that you might be adding. In the case, again, of e-commerce, where we do this a lot in our business is when, we already have a SaaS platform, which there are a lot of them out there. So whoever you might be using, they have a fundamental design. But now there is a new requirement. You've defined that requirement, you've wireframed it, everybody agrees that's the right path that you're on. Now you start building upon that before you give it to the development team to start integrating it to the back end. So this is where you bring in, again, all of the visual elements, and it interacts with the other elements that already exist in your solution, and visually you see everything. We typically, stories for us, when a customer comes to us for an enhancement or a customization, we will build out the high fidelity wireframe and show it to them. Again, going back to Eric's earlier comment, it becomes the record and the accountability of what gets accepted before we move to design. So we've taken the requirements, we've identified the problem that we're going to solve, how we're going to solve it in the solution. Now we're looking at it visually. We can walk through with the clicks. So there are clicks that are engaged. We can see what the next steps are. So we're truly solving that problem. And then everybody agrees or disagrees. So some tools that we use at Gen Alpha, we do use Envision. That's what we present to our customers when we're getting final sign-off. Our product owner uses Sketch. She really likes Sketch. She uses a Mac. So that's a Mac solution. But Sketch easily moves into Envision. And Envision is great because it integrates to Slack, Java. There's another tool that we use. But either way, it allows all of us to collaborate. And to some earlier points that were discussed, it has sticky notes in there, so you can comment and add notes from different team members in the process of getting to a completion of that acceptance of, yes, this is what we want. Customer says yes. And then we go back and we develop. And that's how we can estimate the effort that it's going to take to develop. So it really is a step in the process. And usually you're more committed. There's some budget that's already been identified, and that's how you're moving into this next phase.
Okay, very interesting. So I am going to have a fun follow-up question for you. So
Sure.
As we all know that, ERP is sort of granddaddy of the system, and that is probably going to be the highest fidelity wireframe ever existed, because it's going to have too many options that you are probably not going to be using in this life. So obviously in the ERP world, they probably don't have wireframes. They never have to use that, right? Now, when we talk about tools like Gen Alpha, right? So the reason, my understanding, again, you can correct me if I'm off here,
Sure.
the customers, the reason why they would buy Gen Alpha is because they have to do far more development on top of Shopify, Magento. That's going to be far more risk. It's going to require far more dollars in general. And you are buying something tried and tested, built for your industry, purpose built. So you don't have to go through the painful process of putting these three notes, and we don't know whether that is going to work or not, right? So now, when we are looking at tools such as Gen Alpha, do we still have to go through the wireframing process? When I'm getting a tool that is purpose built for my industry, I already know what works. Why am I going through the wireframing process in your case?
Yeah, in that case, typically the customer is not going through the wireframing. That would be so any good development company, they're going to have a roadmap of enhancements that they're going to continue releasing to their product. So they're going to have a backlog of things that they want to work on through research, feedback from customers, new internal design initiatives. So the wireframing is typically done by that company. Now, where we have done it in conjunction with customers is when they have a new idea of something that doesn't currently exist in our solution. So it would need to be built. And in that case, that's where we have to say, okay, let's visually look at it. And that's where the wireframe comes into place. And, because we do work with Gen Alpha work with large manufacturing companies, they all do have some unique requirements, and it's not uncommon that they would have a customization or a new need that we might want to build out for them to ensure that their customers get the experience that their customers would be looking for from them. And certainly that would be the case where we would involve them in this process. So we would make sure that we're meeting the needs that they have, that their customers have, and we agree upon the solution before we go and do the development.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. So, Dave, I'm actually going to come to you. So, do you want to talk about, the low versus high fidelity wireframe? How low do you want to go in your low fidelity versus how high you want to go in high fidelity wireframe?
I think it kind of depends on the fidelity that you build out is, at what level you are in your ideation process, right? So as you're trying to coalesce ideas and thoughts, then the low fidelity makes sense because you're swapping things and things are likely to change more often. And so it's a lot cheaper to do it in a low fidelity, black and white blocks, to just say, okay, well, the content's going to be here and then it's going to move here, or we need to have our flow where they click here and then this page looks like this and then the conversion is right here, and are we in agreement? So low fidelity is helpful for storyboarding and bringing people through the entire purchase process. And then once you get closer to the intricacies of individual elements, then upping the fidelity makes more sense. So, and especially, and I forget if it was Paul or Eric that brought this up, but having the higher fidelity stuff in mobile helps, because having the taps and being able to see what happens on those things can be very helpful, because it's not exactly clear, especially if you're looking at a static screen that has a bunch of gray boxes, what's going to happen. And again, your job is to share the story as much as you're sharing the connection, because we're visual, but we're also movement oriented. So how do you do that inside of there? The one layer I'll put on top of all of this is, with some CMS, and Sam, I think this might be what you're teasing after, but with some CMSs, it makes it possible to approximate the wireframing process by creating hot swappable modules. So you can build an interface and kind of do like a bare bones proof of concept on a website or on a purchase process or whatever, and have that be interactive so that people can click and see what happens. And you can swap that out and say, okay, well, that doesn't work, or that's confusing, because especially, again, as you go back and forth between different contexts, different page widths and views, the rules change. And to that end, I think the other thing that, all I get to do is at the end of the conversation, I get to go in and cherry pick things that I think might have been missed. So the thing that might be missing for us here is, the context switching that might happen depending on different viewports. So if I'm on a phone, where am I likely to be? You know, if I'm on a PC, I'm probably at my desk, and I also have more screen real estate to have two windows open, and I can research side by side, and I can click and move around. If I'm on a phone, I might be ordering a replacement part for something that I'm on the line and staring at. And so that's a completely different interaction that I need to have. And I need to provide different kinds of information there. Maybe even doing a search function where I just point my dang phone at something and I click on it, and Google image search pops up and says, okay, well, you're looking for part number 80932 or whatever, right? So it's different context by different device, by different viewport. And to be able to build all of that out, that's why you do wireframing. If we tried to develop a fully formed, beautiful interface at max fidelity for every one of these possible million interactions, I would be connecting with you from a yacht somewhere, Sam, if I could get somebody to pay me to do all of that, right? It'd be really expensive. But our job is to get there as fast as possible and then only commit to code once we're ready to build it and we have agreement on what we're building.
Okay, amazing insights there. So we are going to do a very quick round to make sure that we are covering the tools, because our listeners will benefit probably knowing some of the tools. So I know we have already mentioned a lot of them. What I am looking for is some sort of pros and cons. What you like about any specific tools? I'm pretty sure everybody's going to have their own favorites. Eric, do you want to start in terms of what do you like? How many have you used? How many have you seen other people use them, and what do they love?
Yeah, sure. We didn't mention flowcharting, but that's part of it too. We use Lucidchart and Stormboard for flowcharting and idea collection. For online design and collaboration and wireframes, we use Figma or Sketch or InVision. And for commenting, we frequently, if the tool we're using doesn't have commenting, we use PageProofer, which is a little thing that you can leave comments and tag little parts of the page. All of those have different price points. Some are free or for very low usage. Others are really hugely full-featured, really almost design tools, like InVision. InVision is kind of the Cadillac of the whole group there. We use all of those, and designers love it. Developers love that too, because it gives them all the CSS styling that they need for various elements. So that's what we use. For just pure wireframes that do nothing but wireframes, we use Balsamic or Mockflow. So there's quite a bit of different tools there. We've got a lot of things we do. And napkins.
Yeah, they are the best. Thank you so much, Eric, for that. Okay, Paul,
Sure.
I'm actually going to come to you. I don't know if you have any specific tools that you like. What are your thoughts in terms of the tools?
We've used InVision a lot for detailed mocks, and also you mentioned Mockflow and Chalkmark. I think are some tools that we've used. And then for tree testing, which we do often at the same time that we're doing wireframing, we're testing the navigation terms and the hierarchies as well for product categories, and for the terms that we use on site navigation. And we find it's particularly useful to test those, not just for visual navigation, but we're also sourcing them from search terms that we get from search log analysis. But we'll use Optimal Workshop tools, tools from Optimal Workshop for doing tree testing and for doing mock testing where we've got the terminology inside of the wire.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Paul, for that. So, Chris, I know you have mentioned a lot of different tools. Do you want to build on top of whatever you have spoken and others have spoken?
Sure. I think it is important to mention that it's very personal to the designers. They get comfortable with what they're doing. We had an intern last year that we brought on for a project. She was very comfortable with Figma. We just let her use Figma rather than tried. So I'm assuming the school she came out of, that was the tool that they were used and trained in. So Figma would be one that is really relevant. We use InVision, I mentioned, Sketch, and its ability to move from Sketch into Envision and then be the collaborative tool. I guess just adding a tool that we use when we're thinking about making a change to a design and we want to look at how people have been using our tool and the behavior, we will use LogRocket to review how customers have been engaging with the platform. So in our design analysis, we might glean something from that we can put into that future design. So LogRocket is just a new addition that I would add.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. Dave, do you have anything to add there in terms of tools? Any favorites?
Yeah, we also use Sketch and Envision. The one that I don't think anybody mentioned yet was Adobe XD, because we're pretty deep in the Adobe in the Adobe world. Mockups, MOQUPS, is also handy and kind of a low fidelity and easy one. And then I mentioned using CMS. The CMSs that we probably tap into the most for rapid prototyping would be either WordPress or HubSpot, to drag and drop modules in and show proof of concept in real time.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Dave, for that. So the only thing right now we can take is closing advice. We have roughly 2 minutes right now in the clock. So it's going to be 30 seconds per person. So Eric, I'm actually going to start with you for your closing advice.
Well, we didn't say it explicitly, but I would say that every minute and hour you spend doing mockups and using wireframing tools and then progressing into high fidelity tools is well spent, because you will save it on the development process. So that's the message for the execs.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Eric, for that. So Paul, what would be your quick closing advice?
Something we didn't talk about is adding to your wireframes what the data source is behind something. So if you really think about the idea that you've got a headless environment that's drawing data from multiple backend systems, think about a distributor that's showing price and availability. Think about punch out, things that we haven't talked about yet. Linking the data source to some level of the wireframing to communicate from the user experience designer to the integrators what needs to happen on the back end. And that helps communicate the response time requirements that you need to have too. If you need sub-second response time on a screen that's hitting 4 data sources, you've got to have some real good performance on the back end. So think about data.
Love it. Thank you so much, Paul. Chris, what would be your quick closing advice?
Make sure you involve a designer in the process here. Again, there are laws and rules that already exist, and these people are going to save you a lot of time in this wireframing process. So it's okay to start with your napkin, but bring a designer into the true development, because they're going to cut through some things and ask the right questions.
Love it. Thank you so much, Chris. Dave, closing advice, please.
Use a pro and connect and follow their advice, but also don't forget to test with your end audience. Don't just look at your exec team and say, oh yeah, well, Bob says that we can do all this stuff, or Sam Gupta says that it's the thing to do. You actually have to have your end user try this as well to make sure that it's being useful and usable for your audience.
All right, amazing. Thank you so much, guys. That's it for today. If you joined for the first time, this was part of our e-commerce series, for which we meet every Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. We pick one topic related to e-commerce. So make sure you are going to be here next week. We are going to be here with another panel and another topic. So I'll see you next week. On that note, I just want to thank everybody for their time and insights today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.